Welcome back to the news desk. Newly released documents published by The Intercept reveal how easy it is for the FBI to spy on journalists using national security letters, which allow the FBI to bypass normal judicial procedures and to access journalists' private data. If the FBI and DOJ can completely circumvent previous media guidelines and use national security letters and total secrecy to target leakers, whistleblowers, and other confidential sources, then what does it mean for journalists who are investigating the government? To discuss this, I spoke earlier with Pulitzer Prize-winning author and former New York Times reporter Chris Hedges, and I started by asking him just that. Chris, if the FBI can bypass the requirement to go to court and obtain subpoenas and search warrants before accessing private information from journalists, what does that imply for investigative journalists trying to expose government corruption and falsehoods?
Well, it implies, I think, what has been true now for some time, and that is that it is absolutely impossible to shine a light into the inner workings of government unless you go into exile, or as Snowden did, Edward Snowden, or you manage to leak, as the person who leaked the drone documents to The Intercept did, in such a way that it's encrypted and anonymous. But, standard investigative reporting at newspapers like the New York Times into government activities, especially government criminal activities and malfeasance, has been impossible for some time. And this story that The Intercept just published, I think, confirms what many of us in the business already knew.
And in addition to posing a threat to press freedoms, do you think this approach by the FBI is an aggressive attempt to identify confidential sources within the government and perhaps even preemptively prevent them from leaking information to the press? Yes.
I was just actually speaking to a colleague of mine. I used to be an investigative reporter for the New York Times, a colleague of mine who still does investigative reporting, and she was saying that at this point, government officials are so terrified of speaking to the press, even about the most banal of subjects, for precisely this reason. The Obama administration's assault against the press and against civil liberties has been far more draconian than the Bush administration. Obama has used the Espionage Act, or I should say misused the Espionage Act, which was written in 1917 to essentially prosecute people who gave government secrets to those who were considered hostile, hostile powers, has misused it to go after whistleblowers 8 times now, including against Snowden. This administration has been really fierce in terms of shutting down any type of serious journalism, or into the inner workings of power.
And even using journalists as leverage against those whistleblowers, as we saw, for example, in the Sterling case, the way they used James Risen at the New York Times to put more pressure on that case. But these guidelines say that extra layers of internal oversight are not needed if the journalist is believed to be a spy or is part of a news organization associated with a foreign intelligence service or otherwise acting on behalf of a foreign power. Could this be a way to intimidate foreign journalists or foreign news media organizations? I don't know, like the one we're talking on?
Well, for sure. I mean, they interpret the rules, and we know from what little is leaked out that they interpret those rules very broadly. This really gives the FBI kind of carte blanche to monitor, follow all journalists, foreign and domestic, who attempt to write about activities that the government doesn't want written about. It's really quite frightening.
And finally, the Freedom of the Press Foundation just last month, I said 37 news organizations also filed a legal brief demanding more transparency. Do you think this legal pushback is because many in the media feel these secret spying practices are a grave threat to freedom of the press in the United States?
Well, they are a grave threat. The press isn't called the fourth estate for nothing. Its role essentially is to hold power accountable by making power transparent. And when power closes that capacity for transparency, it can carry out any activity that it wants, legal or illegal, and is able to abuse power, as I think this administration has done, as the Bush administration has done, the militarized drones being one of many examples, in very frightening ways. So yes, I find this latest story that The Intercept has put out not so much revelatory, in that I think this has been going on for some time, but it's a confirmation of what all of us in the business understand, and that is it's becoming almost impossible, in essence, to write about what government does.
We have about 30 seconds left, actually, so I want to ask you one more question, and that's, do you think we'll ever see investigative journalism return to what it used to be with the way things are?
I'm quite pessimistic. When we see a whistleblower like Snowden have to flee the country, or when we see a whistleblower like Chelsea Manning locked in Leavenworth, or when we see whistleblowers like Kiriakou or Drake or Sterling or anyone else charged as, in essence, foreign spies, this doesn't bode well for what's left of our, I'm afraid, very anemic democracy.
Some might say it has a chilling effect. Chris Hedges, host of On Contact here on RT. Of course, you can watch it every Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern.